Be
Yeah.
life changing.
Oh, sorry. No,
No, it's fine.
start
We
it.
can we can jump
But
in. By the way, let's before we end, let's figure out what we're gonna do next week. The way I see it is we should alternate
okay.
what stories we read, and then eventually we can start talking other things like poetry or novels or whatever have you. But
Yeah.
the conversion of the Jews, man. Um, I mean, talk about a short story that totally follows the five plot points.
You could talk about that if you want.
All right, so the five plot points: intro, the second crucial plot point where things deepen and the story becomes more complex. The beginning of the rising action, which really starts even in the intro in a good short story, but definitely ratchets up really quick with the second plot point, leading to the climax. We can figure out where we think that is, and then the falling action in the denouement. There's usually two climaxes in a really good short story where you have the emotional climax and the action climax. Um, and
Okay.
uh, and the denouement, which almost in this short story, in some respects, I mean, if this were a cinematic uh, thing, we were a piece of art that we were interpreting, you could almost call the last line the most the highest points of the story. The kid literally jumps off
Jumps
the
into the
building,
net.
you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Ends on
But
the image, by the way.
right, oh yeah, the Halo. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. And
I
he
really
did he like can you come down now and the narrator says and he did right into the center of the yellow net that glowed in the evening's edge like an overgrown halo.
Halo, yeah, the poetic um voice of Roth. This is a young Roth too. This is a 26-year-old Roth, fucking insane.
I know, right?
That sentences like this are jumping off the page. You know, most people who operates as closely to structure as he does can't deliver lines like that. You know,
He does it all
he,
throughout too. He
yeah,
jumps
throughout
out
the
of the
whole piece.
narrative and offers his own like the speaker, the narrator rather, their own like reflection on the thing that's happening in scene. It's crazy.
If we were to compare the day to a man's life, what sunset at or sunrise at birth,
Fuck
sunset,
yeah.
you know, it's just like Jesus fucking Christ, man. He almost sounds like a 50-year-old man who's a poet, you know, trying to do this.
Like, how about this?
Capable,
Being on the roof, it turned out, was a serious thing. If he
yeah,
jumped, he would be. Would the singing become dancing? Would it? What would the jumping stop? Yearningly, Ozzy wished he could rip open the sky, plunge his hands through, and pull out the
yeah.
sun. And on the sun, like a coin, would be stamped jump or
Jump or
don't
don't
jump.
jump.
What a
Yeah.
fucking little paragraph, right? And that's like, those are sprinkled all throughout this story.
So, an author capable of delivering dialogue at its highest levels, story at its highest levels, and what you just read was exposition uh, at its highest levels, thought and emotion, but delivered from an objective third person voice uh, and description of the setting. You know, just unbelievable. It's one of the best short stories of all time,
For
and
sure.
one of the best collections of all time. Goodbye Columbus is actually attached to his novella when it went out.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about with this
Oh,
short story. First of all, the beginning, the antagonist isn't there. The antagonist being the rabbi, but Itzy and Ozzy are, and I don't know if you noticed, but there's no setting. They're just talking
you
like an
know,
empty space.
yeah, I talked to well shit. I don't think you were there, but I like audited one of Laraka's classes once. That was the thing
Yeah,
that came out, and it kind of ties into the theme of the story, which is like light. There's like a theme of like light, this idea of light, and there's
yes,
like, and then so when I read that, I'm like thinking it's just like two
total
voices
darknesses.
in
Yeah, it's
total
just total
darkness,
darkness.
right? And the first real image, the first real setting is the mom lighting the candles for the Sabbath.
Yes, that's
So
a
like,
second crucial plot point. We'll talk about that in a minute.
yeah,
But
isn't that crazy though?
That's a great point.
And it goes
You
back
know,
to
maybe,
that, by the way, at the end, with the sun going down and everything becoming dark again. He's just like yelling into the void. You can't see anybody. So
that's right.
it's kind of like cyclical. It's kind of cool, man. This story just has so many. It's hitting on all fucking cylinders.
Yeah, it
There's
makes
so
you
many
wish that.
things that are just tied in, tied that they're interwoven together, and it feels like so intense. Like it kind of makes you wonder, like how. I know your thoughts on this, but it makes you wonder how. I think I know what your thoughts on this. How intentional all this shit is. Like how, like he is just like burning with fire, right? And like shit is just working. Everything he does, everything he says, is just tying one thing into the next, and
Yeah,
it's all kind of like
thematically, there's connections. He's 13 years old. He's about to be baptized. The story takes place when Ozzy's 13.
mm-hmm.
There's a 13-year-old who's already poking holes in this concept of God, you know, and it's kind of Philip Roth making fun of religion. So there's this big commentary on that, but it's also a commentary on people and how people treat each other in the name of religion. Um,
Yeah,
Oz is a likable character, but he's also really smart, and he's following the Thomas Wolfe method of having protagonists who aren't just really smart, but who actually really care about the people in their lives. I mean, he's invested in his mom. That's why, again, that second plot point, that scene with his mom is so important because
mm-hmm.
he does have respect for real religion. He has respect for the concept of people caring about the dead and about uh their feelings about life and what's
Right,
important in life. It's just when people confront him with things he doesn't understand, he tries to understand them. And that's really the problem in the short story, is
yeah,
that he's both. He's not Izzy. He's not somebody who is just going to make fun of things he doesn't understand. He actually wants to understand them. And he's also not somebody who is going to passively let life pass him by without confronting these people who pose these theses to him, like the thesis of God.
right.
Uh, it's so he's a character who's both smart and courageous, and he cares a lot. And it's also just a really funny story. I mean, the fucking kid, like,
That's I was gonna bring that up as well, man. It's like there's like this balance between the comedy of it all versus like the religious seriousness. The comedy
yeah,
is kind of represented by the janitor a little bit. The
yeah.
firemen are just like, what the fuck is going on with these Jews right
And if you're
now?
gonna jump, jump. If
Yeah,
you're
this
not gonna jump, go down.
stop wasting our fucking time, kid. And the kids
Yeah,
yelling, jump, jump, like cheering him on and like like not really knowing what a martyr is and calling him like be a Martin, be a Martin.
oh,
And then of course
be a
that's
Martin, be a Martin. Yeah,
and the religiousness is obviously is like Binder and the mother, the seriousness of it all, and like what they don't want, and like I don't know. It's like there's like this, and like so you combine those two things, and it's like it just pops. Something about the story just pops, and it makes you just want to read it, man. Like this is only a 22-page story, but it feels like a 5-page story. It's just pure like fire.
it's none of it is extraneous. All of it feels like not just feels like is part of the story. It's the five plot points, like I said. I mean, he just goes through them and it ends when he jumps off the building.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, the
Hey,
humor. Oh, by the way, he's also like running around going we the whole time. It almost feels like a Monty Python sketch,
yeah. Yeah, even him like just saying everybody get on your knees and like the in exposition it says and one by one they had to say they believed in Jesus Christ,
Yeah,
and then all in unison they said it. So it's like it's I think well those are like the last pages, and it's kind of like the really fucking surreal at that point.
yeah.
um but anyway, I kind of got you off track a little bit when I was talking about the light thing, like the way the story begins, like in darkness.
No,
Were
I
you gonna
mean,
say something more
that,
about that?
no, I think you illustrated a really interesting idea of what the theme is and also I mean it also goes to show like you don't necessarily need setting if setting's not relative to the story. That conversation is all that's relative or
Yeah.
important about that scene, is Itzy or Izzy, I forget. It's just your typical 13-year-old. All right. And Ozzy isn't that. Ozzy is atypical.
Mhm.
Um, and all that matters about that first scene is the philosophical questions that Ozzy's trying to understand.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that the
it
way it's like specifically shown is Ozzy is kind of obsessed with the question like God created everything, but especially the light. The light is the thing that like amazed me about it all. Like, how the fuck did he make light? I see how he can make the goats and the sheep, but light. And Itzy is just like, dude,
who cares?
Rabbi
Who cares?
Rabbi Binder said the word intercourse really in front of the whole
Yeah.
class. Like, that just shows the characterization and dialogue, all dialogue, by the way.
Yeah.
There is a
Another
little
one.
exposition of the narrator coming in about Itzy about like what he on the first page, but
Yeah. Itzy preferred more subtle gestures behind his back or sometimes barnyard noises.
yeah.
And he also preferred his mom being in the kitchen rather than, going to school meetings.
Right.
And he also jumps in again, like uh, Ozzy was always asking something different. Um, and really, I mean, what Philip Roth is getting at is that when you hold the concept of God accountable to empirical data and to just logical consistency, every concept of him falls flat. Like if God can make Ozzy says it himself, if God can make the heavens and the earth, why can't he impregnate a woman without her having sex? There is no answer to that. So the rabbi isn't capable of doing it. Rabbi Binder just isn't capable of coming up with
He also
even a bad answer,
Yeah. He
and
also doesn't want to add legitimacy to the question or add legitimacy to the what the question is implying about Christianity and how like plausible that might be compared to what they believe.
or just how implausible the whole concept of God
Yeah.
is, and he's also just like people preferring um or people mourning more over the deaths of people of their religion, people who are like them than other people, Ozzy screaming, I wish all 57 of them were Jewish.
Yeah. The plane
Then you
crash
guys are
story.
doing
Yeah.
shit like really it's just coming to terms with the fallibility of people that he's having a hard time getting over. You know, so many people in life, including the adults, are more like Izzy than they are like us. They
Hmm.
just don't care. They're just trying to get through life. Um,
Right. And it's not
that's the
just the weird thing is it's a story about religion and it goes into this weird like at least my reading of it is kind of an existential like question. Is it me? Is it me when he's running up on the building? He's on top of the building. Like, am I the person doing this? Am I the
right.
person,
Is it us? Am I
right.
the flawed thing, or are they all the flawed
Yeah.
thing? Where's the flaw in all of this? Is it me or is it them? And he's trying to come to terms with that. And
There's just so much going on, man, in this fucking story. And I say
right,
22, I didn't mean to say like 22 pages is like a long story, but it didn't read like that. But 22 pages is so fucking short to get all this in it and to get that like almost like a novel like payoff at the end. It's just crazy.
well, it's all told through scene, and that's just, and every scene is so important. Nothing is superfluous. Again, I mean, it's why it feels like a novella. It's because you get to see and you get to know the characters so well.
Yeah.
Um, it goes back to that. It's why I harp on poems taking place in scene, and why in short stories also, and getting people to talk, getting
Yeah.
people to open up, getting people to talk about their problems, letting their problems drive the story forward until they come to some sort of climax. I mean, and by the way, this one comes out of nowhere. At no points when you're reading the first two scenes do you think this story is going to end up with Ozzy on the roof. Like nobody thinks that. It's just what happens. It's
Yeah, it's pretty wild the turn it makes halfway through when he goes up to the roof.
well, think about it. I mean, Ozzy has no power in his life. Ozzy has no agency in his life. He's in a position where he can't ask the questions that he wants to ask, and he also can't not ask them because people want him to not only say the right words but also believe what he's saying. They want him to be an actor, essentially,
Right.
and they want him to be false, and they want him to be contrary to his own nature.
Yes.
And it's just
So
like
though
there is
even
no
though
out for him. Right. Go ahead.
even though the like move to the roof is like wild and unexpected, it's not implausible because of all this shit you just said.
Well, a
Like
story can go anywhere.
it's set up so well.
The rabbi's chasing him. He's trying to get away from the rabbi. The only exit he can see is through the roof, and so he ends up going through the roof.
Right.
It's just what happens. And once he's up there, all of a sudden he has total agency. At
It's
least
funny.
while he's up there.
It's funny you say the story could go anywhere, and you're right, obviously. But dude, it went the perfect place. It just made so much fucking sense when it went up there and how the story unfolds from that point on. It's like, God damn, if like anything else happened, is this story a classic, Or we just
Right.
go
Like if he
completely
winds
different
up in the
story.
alleyway, he goes home and his mom just beats him again. Like the story has to take place like 10 years later or something.
Right. It turns into a novel or I don't know. It's a
Right.
completely different thing. It's so wild to think.
If they catch him and they beat him, I mean, he submits uh and he becomes, somebody more like Izzy probably. But because he ends up on the roof, and he can leverage his own life against everyone else capitulating to say what he wants them to say, the
You know,
tables get turned. Which really, I mean, it's a dumb turn of phrase, but it's kind of what you want in a story where somebody has no power. You want the tables to turn eventually. Now, in a story that takes place in modern America, what people would more than likely expect is that Ozzy goes to class with a gun. But
right.
I don't think Philip Roth was thinking in those terms back then. It's a weaker story with that happening, anyways. I think it's more interesting when he's not leveraging their own lives against their beliefs, but his life.
Right.
Um, and the shock and horror of watching a kid jump off of a school building. Um, but by the way, I mean, the other thing that Roth does so masterfully is he makes you care about Ozzy. He makes you root for Ozzy because all Ozzy wants is an answer to his question. That's it, you know.
Right.
Um, and nobody can give it to him. His mom can't give it to him. When he tells her what happened, instead of sitting down and trying to give her own rationale, she just hits.
Right.
Um,
And that's what happens
yet,
with the rabbi as well.
right, his father isn't in the story. So his father isn't somebody to juxtapose against the mother and sit him down. Izzy can't give him an answer, and the rabbi can't give him an answer. There's nobody in this kid's life who can give him an answer as to why we conceive of God the way that we do. Why is he somebody who reflects our own imperfections if he's somebody who could create the whole universe? Why is he somebody who can't do this, can't do that? Why make people who aren't Jewish in the first place? Why make us so jaded in the first place?
Yeah.
Why does he act in this illogical manner? Why can't he? I mean, the question he asks is the best one. Why can't he just do whatever he wants? Right?
Right.
Um, and I don't know. I think Philip Roth could have imagined a rabbi who could have answered that in some sense of the word, but he knew that it would be a better story if he gave him a flawed rabbi instead. Here's a
So
guy who, and by the way, the reason that his last name was Binder or the
think about,
rabbi,
yeah, it's Binder versus Friedman.
right?
Ozzy Friedman. What a weird. I mean, that was had to have been
I
intentional, right?
mean, he's binded by, and you've been there too. The the ridiculous position of trying to teach people who aren't interested in what you're teaching. It's a tough like it, there are people who can teach and enjoy it, but
Of course, the teacher would be empathetic towards the antagonist. He's a kind of an asshole in this story because of his
I mean,
predicament.
he's completely an asshole, and he's somebody who can't teach the thing that he's teaching. When Ozzy goes up there to the roof, he doesn't shout, "I'll tell you why God doesn't do this." He doesn't say anything except, "I'll give you to the count of three."
Mm-hmm.
Like coercion. That's all Binder has in the wheelhouse. He has coercion, and he has answers that he's repeated again and again throughout his years of teaching. But at no point has Binder sat down like Ozzy has and thought about, the real problems with God and the real problems with these logical inconsistencies. He hasn't
Mm.
done it. Ozzy has, and that's what's so irritating to Binder. Also, by the way, worth noting, Philip Roth doesn't just introduce Izzy and not use him again throughout the story. He's there throughout the whole story. He
Right.
uses him to piss Binder off more, distract him. He uses him. He's a major player in the fact that rather than answer Ozzy, Binder hits him and hits him badly so that he's
Yeah.
bleeding all over the place.
Right. That
And
he
he
was like in just mechanically in that scene in action without Itzy, it doesn't happen because he hang on. He what does he do? Like you said, he distracts them with like a joke, and the class starts laughing. He turns around, and then when Binder's back is to the protagonist,
positive,
Ozzy,
yeah,
he's like, "You don't know anything." He like has the courage to like say that kid thing, like "fuck you," you don't know shit, and that's what sets off the whole chase, and that
right.
him getting hit, as you were just saying.
And then he provokes him even more when he's on the roof,
Yeah,
as he's out there. So I don't know. Roth was so capable of delivering a great short story at 26. It like disheartens me a little bit that that collection was his only collection of short stories. I wish he'd kept doing it. I mean, he wrote great
yeah.
novels after that, but um,
So,
not for a long time. Actually, after Goodbye Columbus, I mean, you know, uh, you're waiting a minute for Phil because Philip Roth's first novel is almost unreadable. Um, I think it's called um,
so,
When She Left or something. Like
so, so,
I tried to read it, but
so this
not
is
to
the
get off
first
subject.
like major thing he published. Then this book.
Goodbye Columbus, and it won
Yeah.
the National Book Award. So
So he was
Roth
like
won it twice.
cursed. He was cursed.
Yeah.
He had a giant fucking ego for a long time, probably. Well, you know how it is when you write, when you think you think you're the shit. It kind of comes out like shit half the time. Sometimes it works, but
Or maybe he
you need
just
a
felt like he didn't.
confidence, right? But
Maybe he just didn't have. Maybe he didn't feel like he had the chops to write something as good as that for a long time. I mean, he kept publishing things, but letting go, that was his first novel, and I can't stand it. Um, Portnoy's Complaint was his first big novel since Goodbye Columbus, but it's basically an essay, honestly. It's like Sabbath Theater without any of the great characters. It's just an essay
yeah,
about the human hyper focus on sex, the hyper um importance we put on it. There's a great line in that. This is supposed to all say about his other work. We got to get back on the short story, but he said there's this great line, and it's like, why do you care so much about sex? You know, it's just rubbing. It's just a guy rubbing his thing until some white stuff comes out, and that's it. Like Roth was really able to sum up humanity in a line
Yeah,
that
for
made us
sure.
all fucking feel like baboons, but
Fucking
which
gross
is a
motherfucker.
this is a great story, you know, all about that too. I mean, rather than just give the kid an answer or tell the kid you don't know,
Hmm.
you fucking hit the kid and you chase him. And when he gets up on the roof, because you don't have any other solution, you keep giving him till the count of three to get down. You know, like it's a great quandary. Like, what do you have to leverage against somebody who has nothing to lose when you know that you're wrong and they're right? Like the thing
Right.
is, the rabbi can't admit to him, I don't know, because then everyone's suspicion, which is that adults don't know what they're doing, which is the truth,
Yeah.
gets confirmed. And so much of life is people pretending like they know what they're doing. And I think that's really another one of the themes of this short story. Um, that's it's so beautifully articulated. I mean, you know, like the cops in the George Floyd situation who are
Okay.
kneeling on him as he's dying. Like, you guys, like, what are you guys doing? The guy tried to buy some cigarettes with a fake $20 bill, and you're gonna murder him over it. You not see how
Right.
stupid this all is? Do you not see how dumb this is that you guys are doing this? That you guys are in this position, you've been called upon for this. Like,
Yeah.
what social function do you use, or are you worth? What social function do you provide when you're
The
killing people over a $20 bill?
Yeah, the cop just completely took on this. I have power over this person. I can do whatever the fuck
Right.
I want because I'm a law enforcement officer. And there's a study about this with I forget what it's called, but
The Stanford prison
yep,
experiment.
that's it. And yeah, so like people take on the identity of what they are told they are, and in this case, what this guy trained to become.
Yeah.
And he's
See,
like,
Philip Roth figured it out. I don't know when this was published, but probably before the Stanford experiment even happened, that the whole world is just a Stanford experiment, you know?
right,
Um, and ultimately none of us like really know why we're here. See, that's the problem with religion. This is why Philip Roth wasn't religious, but religion tries to answer a question as to why we're here. You know, we're here to serve God's will. Um,
yes,
well, why can't he just, if he's omnipotence and omniscience and he's capable of doing whatever he wants, why do we have to serve his will? Why does he need us? You know, um,
yeah,
why give us free will in the first place? You know, it's also a short story about that. Here's somebody who finally exercises his free will
yeah,
um against people. I can do, and that's really how an artist is supposed to feel. I can write about whatever I want. The story can go wherever it wants. That's why, when I make my argument to students, I'm trying to tell them like art and writing is expressing your free will. You can do whatever you want
Craig,
as
pause for a
long as you
second.
go ahead.
Here's my problem. And I love that idea, and you're right. That's how it feels when you're at the height of your power as a writer, that anything can happen. You could do anything. However, when you read a story like this, which is just perfect, there's like no wrong turn, nothing, there's no holes in the armor. You know what I mean? There's like, it felt like it could be written only this way. It like always existed. And Roth was just there at the right place and time, with the right training, the right mind, and wrote it down. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man. I mean, maybe it's just that kind of like idea that I'm having about this story is a byproduct of just somebody doing whatever the fuck they want and just doing it right, But it feels
Yeah.
like there's like a magic. It's like I don't know. I'm being like kind of religious myself. There's like a little magic to how this fucking story happened on the
I
page.
mean, again, it goes back to my point that if Ozzy isn't chased up that roof, if he's chased down an alleyway, the story doesn't work because he has nothing to leverage. Of everybody and getting like he has nothing to leverage against everybody to make them do what he wants. Um,
Yes. So it just becomes another
but
story that doesn't work, and then we never knew about it. So it could be
but
like that, or I don't know.
I don't know. I think with art at its height, which is I think this is an example of that, and in Hemingway's short story that we talked about last week is also an example of that. Um, you're not the structure has become so second nature to these guys that
Right.
they're able to dream in structure. They're able to have fantasies that capitulate to the form of the thing and also capitulate to it not so much that the whole thing feels rigid. This whole thing feels totally natural.
Right.
One sentence leads naturally to the next, almost as if um while he's making the story up, he's also told the story a million times, you know.
Yeah.
Hence him able to just pause the action and just talk to you about the fucking, the setting and the quality of the day. Yeah,
It's
I think that art has that magic, if that's what you want to call it. Art is able to bring the reader into a fantasy, and the fantasy is so vivid and so alive and so moving to you as a reader that um that the whole thing feels uh perfect.
right.
Um
Pause for a second. I'm gonna restart this
all right.
as we finish. I think we're about to run out. We're on the last minute.
All right. Do we have to buy like a membership or something?
Yeah, I think so. I only give you
All
40
right.
minutes, and then I don't know. I wish I could.
There's at some point you like had a membership or something and we were able to just like, but maybe we weren't recording. Maybe
It was
yeah,
when I
maybe
was
that was,
when I was teaching over Zoom. I think that I didn't even know I had the membership, honestly. But yeah, it was way easier when we were doing those workshops because I had that. I'm surprised. Well, you are in between semesters, so you probably don't have it. But
we'll get like a Discord or something. We'll get some sort of
yeah, we're gonna have to do something else. This is stupid. Um, but
because
any
the conversation's also like the art, and so
so
like
now we
you
gotta
wanted to just
revamp it, like
right.
yeah, start that engine over again. You were like on fire for a second there, and I was like, shit. I'm looking at the timer going down. I'm like, shit. But I think you got a lot of good shit out there.
I think like you look, it's interesting when you're an artist and you're studying something and you study it as if it's perfect because you want to replicate it. But I mean, musicians think about that all the time. Like, how the fuck they look at Beethoven or Mozart or whatever have you, Kurt Cobain, and they're like, how the fuck did anybody do this? How was it ever
Yeah.
done? How did somebody just do this out of whimsy? They didn't even like study it day in day out. It was all whimsical, and yet it came out so perfect.
Right.
But um,
So
trust me, Philip Roth wrote a ton that wasn't perfect. Like Letting Go, for example. I promise you, go buy that book. It's $8. You'll try to read it, and you can't.
I know
You
when I
can't
was
fucking read it.
like quite a few years ago, I was thinking about this idea too when I was reading when I one of the first few years I was reading like Simple Truth, like that poem. I think I talked to
Yep.
you about this. I was like, maybe like all this is just because you can't write that poem every day. You can't write a poem of that quality every day. And if you look at Philip Levine, he obviously didn't. He also wrote a lot of like
His
really
first
good
books
shit.
are so rigid. The poems are so fucking rigid. They're like it's like trying to wade through stone.
Right. And
You
that
know,
happens to poets. It has happened to me too. You like think you can control the thing. I mean, we've had a long a fight about this before, where you wrote a goddamn essay on one of my poems, and you're like, you're trying to control the thing. You're trying to rewrite a poem that is already, gone and lost, or that who you were when you wrote it is lost. And so you can't write this poem exactly like it was and make it better than it was.
it's not like art isn't like anything else in the world. If you want to lift weights, you can force yourself to lift. You can force the thing on days you don't feel like it. you can just get up and lift it anyways and do it out of like this part of you that has nothing to do with joy or fun, and it's just something you're determined to
Right.
do.
Yeah, and you know,
And
when
it
I think
still
of
gets done. You
like
know,
the other part of that, like English and literature is one side of academia and writing. And the other part in this job I've been doing is like these science academics. And I think I kind of mentioned this last time I was talking to you about it, but yeah, they can kind of like just lift the weights and like do the research, and they get shit published all the time, you know, as long as they're putting in the work. For us, we can sit at a computer every fucking day, and most of the time it'll just be garbage and it won't be worth publishing at all.
yeah, we could hit the keys. That doesn't
Or we
mean that
could write
ours
something
happened.
great that we like what we were burning with, and you know, was like just felt great to write, and you send it to people. You know, I send it to you, or I send it to, you know, people I know who are very smart and know what they're talking about when it comes to writing, and they're like, yeah, man, this shit's awesome. You send that out, and it's just like, you know, not the person's cup of tea who you sent it to. So it's like, god damn, man, sometimes it just feels like,
Breaking through is rough, but you still there?
yeah,
All right. Breaking through is rough, but you're never going to get anywhere like forcing the whole thing has to feel like whimsy. You know, there's no better word for it. It has to feel spontaneous. It has to feel fun. It has to feel lighthearted. It has to feel like something, you know, you did purely for the joy of doing it. It can't feel like anything else. And a lot of people have destroyed a lot of arts, you know, trying to force it to be something else other than that.
right.
Um,
And there's
uh,
that's the kind of the catch 22 with writing, because you have all that in the beginning. That's all you really have is
right.
whimsy. You don't have any training, or like you don't know what the fuck you're doing. And so, and of course, and you've seen it just like I've seen it. Students sometimes will just
Well,
break,
they stumble upon it. They
they
stumble
stumble
upon it.
upon it, and they just write something fucking incredible, especially given the you know, there's who that person is and they're like writing life, but and it like blows your socks off, and you're like, what the how the fuck did that happen? And then the problem is they have to do it again. And so the
Yep.
problem, and we kind of like we're talking about this with Roth, like what happened to him after he wrote this. I mean, it's hard to to sit back, like you write this thing, you publish it, you win the National Book Award, and you're hearing all this analysis and people talking about your shit, and like us talking about it now, and like drawing connections, and like
It
everything kind of
destroys. It
ties
destroys most writers. It destroys them.
right. Because
And
then you're
I don't
like,
know
how
how the
do I
fuck it
do
didn't
that?
destroy
How
him.
does he didn't
Yeah.
think about all that when he was writing this? He just wrote the fucking thing and struck lightning basically when he put the pen down. And I'm not saying he got lucky or anything. He's immensely talented, and he studied the shit out of writing more than likely up until this point. And he was about that life, you know, he was in it 100%. And this came out.
He was the best living writer of this country until he died. You know, no question. Nobody had written better stuff than Philip Roth up until the point that he died. But he's also somebody who wrote The Dying Animal, which makes Letting Go and When She Was Good and all those, like The
what
Dying Animal
what is
is
it?
also just unreadable, dude.
What is
Like
it? A book or a
it's
book?
a book. It's a book and it's so bad that I mean, even when I was like 22 and I just met you guys and I stumbled across that book, I was like, oh my God, dude, like this isn't how people talk. Like his capacity for dialogue just was completely eroded. And I'm like, how the fuck is this the same guy who wrote Sabbath Theater? You know, like
Yeah.
how? Um,
It's funny because we were talking about this last week with Hemingway, and even within the same collection, it's like
yeah,
there's
there's
duds.
short stories that are total fucking. I mean, like if a creative writing student turned it in, you'd be like, all right, this guy's pretty good. You know, he's got some chops, he's got some
Right.
things to say.
Of
But for
course.
Hemingway, the same collection as the Undefeated, you're gonna turn this in. You're gonna turn in another country. It's like, are you
Yeah.
serious?
This is something that I think is lost on a lot of like new writers and new people just reading like good literature. Or no, I should say just like people trying to write. When teachers and like people in authority talk about like Hemingway, remember that guy that came to Palm Beach State, and
Stoney. Yeah,
yeah,
Stoney.
the way he talked about Hemingway is like he was a god, you know, and a lot of
Yeah.
teachers and like and critics do that sometimes with people like Hemingway, or even Philip Roth. And you think, oh, so that everything they write is just gold. And so, like when I was a
No.
young writer, I thought like that. I was like, you know, everything, even and you also are bad at like kind of seeing the shit. Like you said, you could see it, like it was not as good as Sabbath Theater, but and maybe you can recognize the shit, but I couldn't, man. When I was young, I was like, there's poems that moved the fuck out of me, and there's other ones that I was like, I'm just not smart enough, or I don't understand it because you know I'm just starting out or whatever. And I still gave it more credit than it deserved, and I treated these writers like gods, but they're just humans, you know, even the best of the best.
I, mean, I thought I thought Chad Colkin was like the best young writer that I'd. I mean,
It was fun to read when back then when you're starting out, you know.
yeah,
So
he's now become a photographer of squirrels.
wonderful,
So
good for him.
that's where his writing career or his writing career went. But
Didn't he get like slammed by one of his ex-girlfriends? She like wrote a book about him.
she wrote a book about him, yeah, and how he wrote a book about her. I don't know.
What a mess.
Like it's something that I needed to read at the time, but it's also, it's not something I could ever read again.
Yeah.
And appreciate.
So
But
so speaking of reading
yeah, your
again,
taste changed. You start to. Sorry, go ahead. What's the question?
I was just gonna say, like, so I don't know why. I guess I chose this story because we were supposed to talk about Sabbath Theater, and we probably will one day if I can ever get my ass uh in line and fucking finish it. But anyway, so I was like, yeah, let's read this story. And I thought about this story, of course, because it's this story. You know, one of my favorite, like one of the stories that I could just think of, and like, you know, I know that story is a banger. And I read it, and so, but by the time I read it, and I read it today twice. And for the first time, read it right when I woke up today, and I hadn't read it in about, I don't know, since that the Rocka class. It had to have been like seven. Had to have been like 7 years. So I didn't really remember the ins and outs of it, or even really the major plot points. I just remember the kid on the roof and you know what he does up there. Anyway, I read it and it just fucking reminded me. It didn't. It just reminded me of like what this is all about. What we're like as writers, like what the fuck we're trying to do.
Yeah,
I was blown away. I was like, I read it, I was just like bawling at the end of reading it. Like it wasn't even like, it's not
it's
like sad
incredible.
tears. It was just like, you know what happens when you read a novel and you finish a novel. It's that same, like a good one, a really good one. It just fucking blows your mind a little bit, like kind of cracks you open um a little bit. And
Yeah,
yeah, just you know, we need
me.
more shit like this, but it's like it's so rare. I mean, there's a lot of great literature, don't get me wrong, and a lot of shit that has the same effect, but this is definitely like, as far as short stories go, this
I
is
mean, it's a
like,
miracle. It's a fucking
it's a
miracle. It's a
fucking
miracle of
miracle.
literature. Yeah. As me and Leo were driving back from Orlando, um, we saw this movie last night, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and we were really blown away the animation and just how wild the story got. And I was like,
Yeah.
what it reminds me of, and what this short story kind of reminds me of is Jimi Hendrix has this version of the Star Spangled Banner. You should listen to it if you
Oh,
haven't.
I know that one. Yeah, my dad used to play that for me when I was a kid.
Dude, we're talking about a miracle of just talent and whimsy, and just going off the rails, but still conforming to a kind of structure that people can understand and recognize. Like you'd still recognize it as the Star Spangled Banner, but it's not like any version of it that's ever existed before will ever exist again. And you know,
Yeah,
it's so much of him. It's so much of Jimi Hendrix like imbued himself in this in this like old song that you know so many people like listen to and roll their eyes at, or they don't really listen to it. They just put their hand up and do the like their Izzy's. They do it reluctantly. Um,
Right.
he took it and he made it totally new. It's totally of the '70s, also, and it's totally of the hippie generation, and it's totally like um just pure distilled art is how I look at it. And the whole thing feels, by the way, whimsical. It feels like he allowed
I didn't
himself to
realize you
just
were
go
so
wherever.
whimsical, Craig.
I mean, it's not something that gets discussed enough. Is the adherence to structure
Right.
and the inadherence to structure at the same time.
Yeah. It's
You
not
know,
something that's discussed really at
like I don't
all.
think I don't
Like
think you could plot this out. I don't think you could storyboard. I don't think you could invent this story on a chalkboard or on a marker board or a washboard. Like
yeah, you're not
not
gonna take
not
the rough
living through
you're not gonna take the
it.
rough draft of the story and workshop it and get this. It's just never gonna happen in a million fucking years.
No, it's just something that
And that's what they don't want you to
um
know when you go get an MFA, by the way, or
right.
when
I
you're
mean,
starting out as a writer, going to workshops, however it happens. But you think that
yeah, it's
everything can be made if you know enough, and you learn how to edit enough and revise. And god damn it, this story was probably revised. I mean, I don't know how it was written. Do you? Like, I would love to
no.
know how he wrote this. It
See,
feels like a
I
story
wouldn't
that
want to know.
I know.
I want it to be a mystery. I want I mean that's always part of the allure of the arts also, is that it's just handed off and it just exists.
Right.
And how it came to be, I don't know if he wrote the whole thing backwards, whatever. I'm sure he
Well,
did it.
it really doesn't matter because I mean, the way I believe that you could write, I think he had it in his first draft, and then whatever he did after that, he might have wrote. I don't think this story doesn't feel like a one draft story. It feels like a story that was looked over a few times, but he had whatever the magic was, whatever the whimsy was in that first draft, and he had so much energy that every revision was just he was bringing that same fucking energy to it. And that's the only way to revise, by the way, is to have that same kind of energy. And it's really about like wanting this thing to be what you saw in your head or what you see in your head. So
Right. But you see, that's how you would imagine this thing being written, because that's how you write. And the only way I could conceive of it being written is the way that I write, which is just he either saw the whole thing in its entirety and basically got like 95% of it on the page,
right.
or he got the whole 100%. I don't know. I don't know how it, and I don't know. Like it could be somewhere between us, or it could be something totally radically different. But
Right.
it doesn't matter. I don't think Roth was somebody who wrote super structurally. I think that he gave. I mean,
Well,
there's
look
no
at
way Sabbath Theater was plotted out.
I was just thinking about Sabbath Theater, which is a wild story. I told you it's like a
I mean,
psychedelic. You know how
yeah, it's like
it's
eating mushrooms and trying to tell a story, man. Because
exactly
Sabbath is always in 50 different places at once. I mean, you're literally going to be in flashbacks, inside of flashbacks, inside of flashbacks when you're reading that fucking story. He'll and and living like in the dramatic present. Um, which, by the way, we haven't talked about that yet. The dramatic past, the dramatic present, dramatic future, because the two stories that we've read have all just taken place in a dramatic present. You really
hey,
can't do much in a short story,
hey, by the
unless you're
way,
James Baldwin. Go ahead.
these two stories we wrote structurally are pretty damn similar, man. He
They're
doesn't
exactly the same.
he doesn't
It's
start
look,
on
it's
he doesn't start on the roof. Remember we were talking about why does it
right.
what a lesser writer would have started right on the fucking roof, but no, he had two scenes right before that led like naturally into this
Yep.
the actual
Giant
climax.
scene. Yeah.
Yeah, this
The
giant scene.
last scene is just one big scene,
Yep.
you know, and there's two scenes before that build complexity towards the third really big dramatic final scene, and the final scene lasts all the way up until the end of the story. You know, yeah. So actually, structurally, they're almost exactly alike. They're not. The Undefeated's way longer, I think, but that's because Hemingway had so much more to talk about. And by the way, think about it like this: so you have a first scene introduces the problem and maybe a little bit of history, which actually is exactly right. You get a little bit of Ozzy's history and a little bit of Manuel's history in the first scene, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second scene is the second crucial plot point where everything deepens and gets more complicated. You understand in Hemingway's that this guy is actually a really great guy. That everybody in his life is telling him to quit. It's not just the boss. The boss isn't just some asshole who doesn't want to pay people and doesn't need them. It's there may have been some consideration even with the boss telling this guy, hey, you need to stop bullfighting, bro.
Yeah.
And by the way, Izzy's right. Like that's the other thing is Izzy was ultimately right in that Ozzy needed to stop asking these questions to get along in life. But Ozzy's also right too that um the rabbi doesn't know what he's talking about, and there are logical inconsistencies with God. And you know, his character is flawed in the sense that he can't get through life without asking these questions. It doesn't matter what the repercussions are. He's not somebody that's going to pass through life like Izzy is and just get along to go along, you know? The
Right.
same thing with Manuel. Manuel isn't the kind of guy who's going to just go become a day laborer or whatever the fuck, you know, with the remainder of his life. He has to be a bullfighter. You know, it's just who he is.
These are the Hemingways and Roths. You know, they know these characters intimately.
Yeah, you have to.
That's who they are. That's the type of person they are. Of course, they're writing about this.
And by the way, they're both reflections of those two authors. Hemingway
Yep.
wasn't a bullfighter, but Hemingway couldn't be anything other than what he was, which is a rampaging drunk, somebody who was always fucking up his relationships, somebody who was always getting into fights, somebody who was, you know, just wild and out of control. And Philip Roth was an atheist who was born into a strictly Jewish family in a Jewish neighborhood. You know,
Right.
he had religion all around him, and he always thought it was bullshit. Um, he always was somebody who respected logically sound things. Um, and it costs him a lot, by the way, in life. Like the sad part is when Ozzy grows up, he lives alone, you know, in a compound, you know, after becoming the world's most or America's most successful writer. He fucking lives alone. And you can
That's
see
what
again,
Roth did.
yeah, Roth lived alone on a compound, dude. Think about that.
Damn.
The Pulitzer Prize winning, two-time National Book Award winning, best-selling author, critically acclaimed author, and he lived alone in a palatial estate. There's a great line.
It's trying to remind me of I don't know why Hunter S. Thompson. A little
Yeah,
bit. Hunter S. Thompson was the same way.
and Hunter S. wrote nonfiction the whole way, basically. I mean, as close to nonfiction as you know somebody like Hunter could write. But yeah, I mean, it's the case for a lot of them. A lot of these guys like live tragic lives. Hemingway lived a tragic life. You know, Philip Roth, not maybe not as tragic, but tragic in its own right. Um, Hunter definitely uh, ended a sad way, also on a compound, just straight up suicide.
Yeah.
Hunter, you know, after years and years of drug abuse and whatnot. I think that he just couldn't write anymore. You know, I think if that's your purpose in life and you lose it, you know, what do you have left? We asked Stoney that
Oh
the other
God.
when we saw him. Stoney's like, we got nothing left, you know.
You ain't wrong.
But
Well, you have to find something else. I don't know, man. That's a tough one. That's tough. That's a tough one.
yeah, it's a great episode of House where this it's not a bullfighter but a bull rider discovers in his prime that he can't ride bulls anymore, and House is like, "What are you gonna do?" And Bullfighter's like, "Ah, I'll love something else."
Really?
Yeah, it's a fucking great episode.
I've probably seen it because I've watched pretty much all of House except for the last season, but
I think it might be the last season or the second to last, the seventh season, but
oh, okay.
it's definitely worth checking out again. Maybe I'll watch that um tonight. But yeah, Roth, man.
Yeah, what do you think? All right, I guess let's wrap this shit up. What do you
Final thoughts.
final thoughts?
Um final thoughts. One of the best arguments against religion, ultimately, one of the best arguments against how we raise kids and how we treat kids. By the way, the mom, we didn't talk about this, but we should. When the mom sees her son, this is what LaRocca talks about when he teaches this. He's like, when the mom sees her son on top of the roof, of all the things that she could say, she says, "Look at him, my son's become a martyr." Like what a horrible thing to say at that moment. She could have said anything in the world to Oz at that moment, and she failed. She
Yeah.
failed them. So everybody in this kid's, it's really a story about failing. Binder couldn't say anything about God that would make Ozzy listen or think about him, um, or come any closer to the rabbi's way of thinking than he did. He could just hit him. And the mom
Yeah.
couldn't either. And that's why, by the way, they all fell. They all fell to their knees because really, um, none of their belief in God was really all that impressive, was really all that strong to begin with. And so it wasn't about God. It was just about keeping somebody in their place.
Yeah. Power, their
Which is
power over them.
right. It's power. It's the Stanford experiment all over again, whereas in Hemingway's story, everybody was right when they told Manuel, "You need to stop. You're not as good at this thing as
And
you
there's the
think you are."
difference between Hemingway and Roth, by the way.
Yeah, Hemingway was more flawed, and everybody was right except the narrator in the Hemingway story more often than not, and everybody was wrong in Philip Roth's story. But it's why the '80s were so great for horror movies because if you're going to tell a story about a kid, then and you want the kid to be rooted for, then talk about how sometimes kids stumble upon the right answer and the world just
Yeah.
stifles them and shuts them down. That's a compelling story.
Like the student who writes a great poem that one time.
Yeah, the world, it's man versus society, and society's wrong. That's always a compelling story. And in Hemingway's story, it was man versus the whole world, including himself, and the world is right. you know, um, yeah. So both both structured very similarly, almost exactly the same, but totally opposite thematically in terms of who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was reflected in the authors and how the authors conducted their lives. Philip Roth wasn't a drunk. Philip Roth wasn't a crazy man. Philip Roth wasn't somebody who had to live on the edge. He wasn't out there hunting lions and elephants and shit. He was a
Yeah.
thinker, a thinking man.
Yeah.
And Hemingway was. Next week, I want you to finally read A Father's Story by Andre Du Bois. Um,
Okay.
really, 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 really good story. I transcribed the whole thing by hand, or not by hand, but by computer. Um,
I'm assuming you've emailed me this story. Am
a
I
long time
insulting
ago.
your intelligence, or am I insulting you by saying
No,
that?
I said
I
it
don't
to you,
remember.
and he was laughing. Craig, I'm not going to read this fucking thing, you stupid. And I'm
Oh,
like,
it was
man,
during
you
my
should.
I'm not reading anything you fucking send me period a couple years ago.
Yeah, dude, you're going to read it, and I guarantee you, as soon as you read it, you're going to send me a text like, "Holy fucking shit!" dude, I can't believe I didn't read this.
All right,
I'm gonna be like,
I'll
dude,
write that out real
I'm
quick.
like, dude, it's as good. Like if every short story he wrote was as good as this, he'd have been the next Hemingway. I mean, it's fucking insane. Never read anything like it.
All right, cool.
And we'll talk about that. It's not all told through scene. One of its faults. It's the first time we're going to talk about exposition. Um,
Oh boy.
it's also again about a little bit about God. So that's interesting. Here's a religious person and how they view life. You know how I feel about religion, but I still love this short story. The last conversation in the piece is literally with God.
All right, Craig. All right, we will talk about it.
um, Andre Du Bois. I'll send it. I'll resend it again right now. So we'll
All
talk
right,
about.
cool.
And I gotta figure out some way to like get Discord or something, some sort of service that we can.
Yeah, we could probably do a Discord. I'll look into it too. All right.
All right, Mike. All right, man. See you
All
later.
right.
Bye-bye.
Later, man.
Peace.